Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we've got a friend of the show and a friend of mine, Duwane Adams. Duwane, how you doing?
I'm doing very good, Jay. God bless you. It's good to hear your voice.
Yeah, it's always great having you on the podcast. We've had some great episodes in the past. I encourage the listeners out there to go back, and if you like this episode, which I'm sure you will, go back and listen to the prior ones with Duwane. Duwane, we're kind of in some crazy times right now with the COVID-19 and the country getting shut down, and then coming out of that, we've got some rioting and looting going on, and people upset, and just kind of crazy times since we last talked.
Well, it's way over my head, Jay. I never thought I'd see any of the 19 and the riots and all of it combined. I never seen anything like it, Jay. It's actually it's surely not the country that you and I grew up in. It's really concerning.
Yeah, it is concerning for sure. Here on the podcast, I just try and talk about hunting and fishing and kind of stay out of all the mess. But the reality is, we're in it, and we've just got to keep plowing through and stay positive. And I know with everyone's businesses and financial issues with the COVID-19 and country being shut down, people are wanting to focus on hunting and fishing and have a little bit of an outlet to just kind of get some relief from thinking about all of that. Before we get into specifically on this episode, I want to talk about Kaibab deer hunting and Coues deer hunting because we have a deadline coming up here next Tuesday on June the 9th for Arizona. And before we get to that, just talk a little bit about elk hunting, what your outlook is, and how are you stacked up for hunters, or do you have any availability? What's going on out there?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. To be very honest with you, we had six archers and all wonderful people that hunted with us before, but we lost them all, Jay. And the reason they lost their jobs, and they're all in different states. They just lost their jobs, and so when they tell you things like that, the reality sets in, and they had the point guard, so they just turned them back in, and they'll come back. But that's reality,
It's
and when you
heartbreaking,
have
isn't it?
it is. I was just getting ready to say when you have 40 million Americans, you're going to affect them. And I have outfitters all over the United States that I'm friends with, and it's the same thing with them. They're losing business. I talked to one of them in Arizona. It's a good friend of mine, and he's lost 10. And I've lost 6, and I know some the boys up in Springerville and in Prescott, and they've all lost clients, and it's all not our fault. It's
Right.
not their fault. It's the fault of that reality has set in. So you better believe it. If anybody wants to hunt Unit One, give me a call. I mean, we'd love to work a deal because we're literally, this is the first time in over 30 years I do not have an archery elk client.
That's unbelievable. It just goes to show the craziness of the times. I encourage anyone out there that has Unit 1 tag and is looking for a guide. Dwayne's got 40 plus years of experience up there, and Dwayne, I'm sure by the season starts you'll be up and running. It's kind of crazy too on a year like this where we've got good moisture. I've talked to a handful of outfitters as well that have had cancellations and whatnot for elk season. So, yeah, definitely if you're out there listening, you've got a Unit 1 tag, give Dwayne a call. Should be a phenomenal elk year up there as far as antler growth and bugling.
I think it's going to be unbelievable. My son Nick DeBaca and our grandsons, we went fishing up there for a week, and of course we fished in the morning and we look at elk in the evening, and it was just unbelievable. It's just 2 and 3 and 400 elk and everywhere you look, and the growth was unbelievable. And it's there's still snow on Mount Baldy, so that always tells you that there's plenty of moisture and the green lush everywhere. The elk just were just mowing it down. So you bet. I think the kaibab the same thing. It's just going to be unbelievable.
Yeah, Dwayne, let's move on to the deer portion here. I want to start with Coues deer, and I know a lot of the listeners get a lot of positive information when I just kind of shotgun down through the units. And on some of them, you're not going to have as much experience, and you can just say, I don't deal with that, and let's move on. And some you may have a little bit to say, and some you may have a lot to say. So let's start with the Coues deer. Then I want to dive into talking about the Kaibab, both the early and the late hunts here. But the Arizona Coues deer units, and again, you're from San Manuel, which is, for those that don't know, it's kind of southeastern Arizona. It's kind of over by Unit 32 and 33, right, sandwiched in between them. But there's also Coues deer in central Arizona and eastern Arizona. So we'll start with central Arizona. We'll just go down the line here, and we'll start with the lowest number. We'll go with 6A, Unit 6A for Coues deer.
There's some gigantic deer there. There's not a lot of deer, but there's some world beaters in those big canyons. If you can know how to glass, you can kill a gigantic deer in 6A.
Don't you think 6A too, Duwane, is one of those units that's pretty darn thick, and you're not going to see, like you said, the density is not high. But in some of these units where it's really hard to glass and it's super, super thick, maybe with timber or with brush or both, that lends itself to having an environment where a few big bucks are gonna make it and get some age on them.
That's that's exactly why they're there, and you hit it right on the head, Jay. That's why there's some unbelievable bucks there. I actually think that there's more big bucks die of old age in a unit like 6A and some of these other ones than people kill because they can't kill them. It's that simple.
Unit 21, which is kind of south of Camp Verde, east of I-17.
There's some gigantic bucks there too. It's the same scenario. Once you get around that real thick country, there's some big bucks in 21, and every year somebody kills a 120 or 130 type deer out of there.
I think one of the things about 21 as well is, some of the recent fires we've had over the last handful, and let's even say the last, 7, 8, 10 years, and some of the more recent fires, some of that thick country has burned, and it's got some very remote country. It's a pockety unit as well. Okay, 22, the Matazel Mountains.
Same thing. It's the exact same thing. 22 has just unbelievable bucks. And it's exactly what you just said a minute ago. The Manizales burned years ago, and that opened that up. And then you have the fire above Payson and the same thing. So all that whole rim, all in there, there's some gigantic bucks in that country.
Unit 23.
Same thing. I think 23 has. I've got a couple of friends that's killed bucks in there in the 130s. And they've got little pockets, and the difference is they're sitting there and they're looking at that same hole all the time, hoping that they get a little opening, the deer comes out in it. It's not like hunting down south, but once you have developed that kind of ability to sit there and keep looking, you have a chance to kill a big buck.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about 23 is it has low desert, Coues deer down in the low stuff, you can be chasing them in the cactus. All the way up into the pines. So it's definitely a unit that has a lot of diversity of terrain. 24, let's see, 24A.
24A is exactly like you just said a minute ago. It has a desert all the way down into Hayden, all the way back up past Globe into 7 Mile Wash, and all the way over towards Roosevelt. So you have the Salt River Canyon, which I've hunted along in there, several times. In fact, my son-in-law and I, when we were going up to the mountains, I showed him 8 or 10 places that I'd killed 10 or 11 bucks with clients, and he told me, "I didn't even know you ever hunted here." I said, "Nick, that was before you were born."
You weren't even thought of then yet.
That's what he started laughing. I said, "So that's how long." There's some great bucks in 24A.
24B, Superstition Wilderness.
I think that's a sleeper, and I tell you, the fire is devastating as it was. It's still unbelievable now because the growth is starting to come back, and there's some really big bucks in 24B. But you have to lace it up to go into those places, and for most people, they can't do it or don't know how to do it. But the person that can, 24B is a sleeper.
For sure, I definitely agree with that. Spending a bunch of time in there last year. looking at sheep, it's definitely a place where a deer could get big, and it's very remote. Probably one of the more remote units that I've been in, as far as looking at different Coues deer habitat. And I think that burn will only do it really good over the next couple years. Okay, 27, unit 27, 28. So it's like the Blue River and the Palencia Mountains.
Well, there's some of the most biggest bucks in the world, I think, live in 27. And it's just exactly what you're saying. There's so much water, there's so much habitat there that you either go in on horseback down to Blue or any of that country all in there. It's just not accessible unless you want to lace them up and go in it. And there are a lot of my cousins and relatives in that Morenci area that have killed some gigantic deer. And they kill them consistently. It's not like they kill one every 4 or 5 years. If they get a tag, they kill a big deer.
29, the Chiricahuas.
I don't like the 29. And the reason I don't like it is because the access is cut off. It used to be where you could get access and get around and get into 29. If you have that access that you can get in, it's a really great unit. But if you don't, you're in trouble because they got a lot of the roads blocked off.
Don't you think some of that private property and lack of access actually, like you said, if you do have access, it could be just a world-class hunt, but if you don't, you're in for, just a rude awakening.
Well, there's a young man that grew up here, and his dad was my football coach, and he has access in there, and he's killed 2 bucks in the 130s. But he has access to get in there, and he tells me, Duwane, I'm just driving in there, and I can glass, and you can see the deer. There's nobody that can get into it. So sure, they have a chance to grow up, but for an average person or even non-average, you can't get in. So that's why I tell clients I'd stay away from there unless you have access.
Okay, 30A, several mountain ranges, the Dos Cabezas, the Petagrosas, and the Swiss Elms.
It's a good place. It's always been good. I've hunted 4 or 5 times out in there. It's a good. There's some big bucks there.
30B, the Mule and Dragoon Mountains.
That's another problem with access. So I kind of stay out of there. There's a lot of those ranches that if you can get in, great. If you can't, you got problems.
31, which is Mount Graham, and
I think 31 is another sleeper. They've got fires on Mount Grahams and Mount Teresa, every once in a while, and those deer have moved back down into the desert there all around 31. And there's a lot of good bucks that are killed in 31. So that's another good place to kill a big buck.
I think that habitat too, like you said, in the Santa Teresas that border the San Carlos Indian Reservation there, there's a
Yes.
chance for a big deer to slip through and get some age on them.
A few years ago, Jay, we killed, I say a few years ago, 15 years ago, I killed a 122 in that country you're talking about. And everybody drove by him, Jay. He was down low. And I just happened to find it down there. And then we went in there a couple of days later and ended up killing him. And so, yeah, it has a great potential.
Isn't it funny, Duwane? I find myself saying what you just said, where someone will say, "What about this?" And I say, "Oh, a couple years ago, I did this or that, or I caught a fish here or this," and I go back and look, and it turned out it was like 14 years ago. I'm like, golly, time's flying.
Yes.
Unit 32, right in your backyard, the Galeros and the Winchesters.
Very difficult mountain range because the access is very limited. And so they've got you blocked off from all around. But I've seen a lot of backpackers in there. There's a lot of deer, but there's no road that goes into the mountain range. And if anything that's close, you got 7 or 8 or 10 cars parked there. So, but if you're willing to lace them up and go in, there's some tremendous deer in the Galeros.
You know what's interesting to me, Duwane, is you've got 32 and 33, and you can actually be in the Galeros and look just across the valley at the Catalinas. And from a density standpoint, in my opinion, it's like apples and oranges. It's so mind-boggling to me how the Galeros, yeah, they have some good deer, but it just seems like the crown jewel of 33 is just across the valley, and those two units are so different.
Well, it's night and day, to be honest with you, Jay. The 33 to me is one of the premier units in the whole state to kill gigantic Coues deer. And they're from the top of Mount Lemmon all the way down to Salmon Well. They're all around Oracle and into Rincons. And and I think the fire is the best thing that ever happened to it, because a lot of the places that these deer are now, there weren't very few deer because the manzanita was such over their heads. I think the lions could just wipe them out and they didn't have a chance. But now all that's burnt. And so there's so much country there that's got gigantic deer. And I tell people, if they want to kill a big deer, I'm talking big, if you can lace it up, the Catalinas is the place to go.
Duwane, what do you think? This was brought to my attention. There's actually an October 16th through the 22nd, then an October 23rd through the 29th, then November 6th to the 12th, then a muzzleloader hunt the 13th through the 19th, and then November 27th through the 6th, and December 11th through the 31st. I started out by just mentioning that early hunt, the 16th through the 22nd, but then I started looking at it, and there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different hunts in 33. At some point, am I wrong? At some point, having anywhere from 425 to 500 tags. At some point, are they going to end up shooting that mountain range out? I mean, seems like we say it every year, but it continues to produce.
Well, I think that they're at that point and now. But I say that, but there's still places you can walk into. There is nobody.
Right.
The front faces of the Catalinas, Jay, is one of the biggest sleepers that there is. And and probably a lot of people on the podcast, if they hear me saying that, are going to be mad. But I'm telling you, the Catalina front faces, from the Mount Lemmon Road all the way to Pima Canyon, all the way around into the state park, you can lace them up, and I'm telling you, within 35 or 40 minutes, there is nobody there, and there's just unbelievable bucks that lives in those faces there. But it's not an average hunter that can hunt there, Jay. You got to be a guy like me. You got to be a guy like you. You got to be a guy that really wants to put the effort in to get in there. And there are a lot of people that live in Tucson and know those places, but there's some gigantic bucks on the front side of, from Sabino Canyon all the way. Just go up the road, get out, and start walking, and there's some big bucks, but you got to be willing to put the effort in. That being said, there is too many hunts, and the deer that are in the marginal areas are wiped out. Right. Because they have no chance to grow up. For the deers that are back in that country, Alder, Edgar, Buman, all the way down into the Rincons, well, there's no way in but to lace them up. And there's only so many people that want that kind of a hunt. They're not everybody out there doesn't want to backpack in.
Right. Do you think normally we're talking about the October hunt being, that end of October? I've got to think that October 16th to the 22nd is a phenomenal hunt because they're still in that, kind of pattern, almost summer pattern. They've gone hardhorn, but they're not quite as wary as they get, towards the end of October. What do you think about that first hunt?
I've killed I've killed 42 Bowden Crockett bucks as clients in my lifetime, but I've probably killed 15, 16, 17. And it was the first day of the early season, and we had patterned the deer and knew where they were going, what they were doing, and I'd close the gap. We'd walk in there, it's 2 and 3 and 4 hours before the sun come up, and be sitting there and kill those things within an hour of the sun coming up. That's how I killed all those deer. But that being said, Jay, once that first shot goes off, and they bump those deer, if somebody bumps them, that the rodeo's on, because you better have place 2, 3, and 4 that nobody's messed with, because those deer are leaving, and they're leaving now.
Unit 34A, the Santa Ritas.
Unbelievable unit. We guided a lot. I love it. We killed a lot of great deer there. Killed 3 good bucks there last year. The client that I had has killed 23 bucks with me. He's been hunting with me for almost 40 years, and he's drawn all the tags that he's hunted with me all over southern Arizona. It's just been the middle hunts, not the rut hunts. We just the leftover tags and we draw it. But we killed a 103-inch buck there last year, and he's 74 years old.
That's awesome. One thing I like about the Santa Ritas is you've got good access on both the west side and the east side. You know, with the west side being there with what is it, I-19 going south.
Yeah.
And then over on the east side, you know, you've got, I think it's Highway 83. You've got really good access to move around in that unit. And it's one of the most beautiful units as far as Coues deer habitat as well. Okay, 34B, the whetstones.
I don't know it that well.
Okay.
I never really hunted there.
35A, the Huachucas.
Same thing as I don't hunt down there because a lot of that Huachuca is the base runs into it, and so I just kind of stayed away from those.
35B, the Patagonias.
I love them. The Patagonias have got some great bucks, and there's a lot of access there, and that's one of the reasons I stayed there instead of the other two units that you just referenced to, because there's so many roads that you could go in different directions. And about 10 years ago, my boy got a leftover tag, and we got after a buck. We thought it was close to 120, and we didn't kill him, but we chased him for 5 days and seen him twice, but he was in a thick thing, but literally in the process of that, we ended up letting 30 some odd bucks go trying to find that buck. So, and I've guided there several times. It's a very good unit.
36A.
I love it. And that's a unit that's very hard to figure out for most people because they drive by the deer. A lot of those deer are right in the bottoms, out in the flats, and that's where I learned to hunt desert deer 40 years ago, was right there in 36A where nobody really looks. And they're driving, trying to get up those mountain ranges, and those big bucks are down there where nobody looks.
36B, the Tumacacris and Atascosas.
To me, it was one of my most favorite units for a lot of years, and it's not anymore because they've got so many tags and so many hunts there. And reverse of 33, there's no access in 33. There's access just about everywhere you want to go at 36B. And so there'll be a four-wheeler or trucks, and and I don't know what the tags are numbers this year, but it was as high as 800, like 4 hunts, and that's too many.
36C, the Baba Kivris.
That's a great unit. They've killed some big bucks there. But it's the same thing. I've killed most of my big deer out on the mountain. I kill them down on the flats.
When you talk about, and we've talked about this before on some other podcasts, these deer, you've talked about, people choosing areas to hunt. Watch out for the middle of the mountain. Watch out for the prettiest Coues deer country. You kind of want to stay out of that because it's kind of the middle range. It's kind of where everyone goes. Do you still stick by that?
Yeah, I don't do that. Not on the first hunt. I don't, because that you got a chance. But boy, once you got 2 and 3 hunts and they pounded them, those deer are either way back in close to the reservation, or they're down in the flats where they feel safe. I'll tell you a story, Jay, and I hope Luke listens to this, because I glassed a buck down there out in that flat at about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, and I told Luke, I said, here's what you're going to do. And now he was in college them days, so he needed money. And he said, I had to hunt. And he said, what are we going to do, Dad? I said, you're going to walk down that road. I said, about 2 miles, son. He said, then what? I said, I'm going to motion you. You're going to get over. When you see me, I want you just to stand there for about 30 minutes. That the wind's blowing this way, Luke. He's going to smell you. And he said, you think it's going to work? I said, if this ain't going to work, Luke, we got to do something. And so he said, so he went on down there, and I motioned him over. And I'm going to tell you, Jay, he wasn't there 10 minutes, and the buck stood up. And here he come walking towards us. And he kept walking, and he kept walking. He didn't run, Jay, and then he just kept walking. He walked us within 300 yards of it, and we shot it.
Unreal. You got him?
We killed the deer. And Luke heard the shot go off. And he come up there, and he said, did you get him, Dad? And I said, we got him, Luke. He said, who would have believed that? He said, who in God's name would have believed that? I said, Luke, what was we going to do, son? He said, I know what you did. He said, but that deer could have went any direction. But I said, but the wind was blowing this way, Luke. I banked he was going to come right up in this direction. At least we could get a chance at him, and we killed him.
Good for you. Good for you. All right, let's talk about October, and you've touched on it, but the October, November, December hunts. Everyone wants to hunt the December hunt because of the quote unquote rut. And we've talked about before how, a lot of times you don't see a ton of rut or very much rut until after Christmas, even those last couple of days. Um, do you think too much emphasis gets placed on those December hunts?
Oh, I do. I really do, because there are a lot of great Coues deer hunters killing those deer outside of that hunt, because that's such hard to get that thing. But I think once you learn to be a good Coues deer hunter, you don't need to rut. And sure, the rut helps. I mean, I'd be silly to say it doesn't help, but I don't think you need that to kill a good deer. I think if you have good glassing skills and you stay on that program, I think you're going to find yourself a big buck.
Duwane, while we're still on Coues deer, I want to ask you specifically about desert mule deer, and would you mind, maybe spewing out two or three of the desert mule deer units that you think people should consider?
Yeah, one right out of Phoenix is 39.
Unit
It's
39.
it's 39. There's a sleeper. I helped a friend years ago chase some sheep in there, and I was absolutely flabbergasted that there was some really great deer there. And 37A uh, may be one of the top units, and the reason being is they do not have any August hunts there with a bow. They do not have any December hunts with a bow. You have 15 days in January, then they shut it off. So, and that has let those bucks grow up there, and so they don't have a lot of tags with a rifle hunt there. So there's some great big deer in 37A. We all know about 37B, but 37B is pounded hard because it's open all the time, and they give a lot of tags there in 37B, and the access is pretty hard. But there's still some big bucks in 37B, but I think 37A is a lot better. And then, of course, 36A down south is always a great deer place to chase desert deer.
Do you do desert Coues deer hunts?
Yes, yeah. With a bow, you mean?
No, well, rifle. Do you do any of the rifle desert Coues deer hunts? Or
Yeah, yeah. Sure we do. We a lot of times that's where we're hunting.
okay, okay. Before we get into the Kaibab and talking about that, I want to thank the sponsors of the podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com. Cody Nelson, my friend of 20 plus years, is the glassing guru, the optics authority. If you're looking for any binoculars, tripods, spotting scopes, rifle scopes, rangefinders, anything to do with optics, with glassing, give Cody a call. He's the optics manager there at GoHunt.com. You can reach him at 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. You can send him an email directly at optics@GoHunt.com. And remember, when you call that line, he's going to pick up. It's Cody that you're going to get. You can also text him or call him on his cell phone, 602-399-3699. I also want to remind you guys it's application season. Remind you about the Go Hunt Insider. Just for signing up using the J Scott promo code, you can get a $50 Go Hunt Gear Shop gift card. Just go to gohunt.com/J Scott. I also want to thank Coues Ultralight Hunting. You can find out more by going to their website and ordering directly off their website. That's the only place to get the gear. That's KUIU.com. Coues Ultralight Hunting. They just released their new Velo, their third camo pattern. It's the Velo pattern. It's just been coming in over the last week, getting a few of the pieces in the Velo, and I really like it. You can also go to Coues, that's KUIU.com, to find out more. Also, phonescope.com, use the JScott20 promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount on all orders. Duwane, let's jump into the Kaibab, and let's talk about 12A East and 12A West. And give me the rundown on 12A East. and then we'll talk about the West.
I think the East is has some tremendous deer. It's just not any tags. It was 250 tags 4 or 5 years ago, and they're down to 95. And there's 30 on the late hunt. But we killed Nick and John Bouchamp, two guys that guide for me, killed a 208 there last year, and they also killed a 190. And so the east side is exploded. And another young man that guides for me, John Weiler, killed a 193 on the late hunt, and we got in trouble on the late hunt because there was so much snow that we couldn't get around, and it actually it killed us. The young man that I was helping, we were stuck 5 times in less than about 2 hours with chains on all the way around. So that got ugly. But there's some big bucks on the east side.
Do you think with the snow on that east side hunt, do you think that there were deer, and do you think this year will be even better because of deer that are holdover deer?
Yeah, that's exactly. I talked to 4 or 5 different guys. Nikki and I did, and they were going home because they couldn't quit. They weren't equipped to stay, and they were staying at Jacobs Lake, and they were stuck in the parking lot with about 2.5 to 3 foot of snow, so there was no access even to get down to get to the deer. So you better believe it, those deer made it. If they didn't kill those deer within the first 3 days, then they got in trouble, because that's on that fourth day is when the snow started coming, and it got ugly.
With the late hunt, there's only 30 tags, and I believe you were correct. It's 95 tags on the early hunt. Um, there is a big discrepancy in a 1 month period of time, though, between hunting them on the early hunt and the late hunt, is there not, on the east side?
Yeah, yes, big, because the rut is almost every year is his full time swing rut at that time, and they're so you have a great chance to find some does and kill one, and those deer move down to the Cox Cones and down to Buffalo Ranch and on and on. But yeah, there's some gigantic deer. We seen 2 deer that were just unbelievable. We couldn't get to them because of the daggum snow. We were stuck in yak, but they were way over 200 inches.
How long have you been hunting the kaibab?
This year I've been guiding it 40 years.
That's awesome. All right, the east side, as far as access compared to the west, how is it getting around on the east side?
And it's not as much access. There's only 2 roads off the top of that mountain that go down to the bottom. You got the east side game trail, and then you got one road that falls off the top, and that's it, where you got to circle around and come into Buffalo Ranch. There's not as much access by any means. There's roads all over the west side, but those canyons, those fingers that fall off there, you either have to lace it up and walk out to it, or you can't hunt them.
All right, let's talk about that west side. So more access, a lot more country. Would you agree? There's a lot more habitat.
Yeah, there's probably 3 times the deer are more on the west side, and the mountain gradually falls off, not like the east side where it falls off thousands of feet, and so the food changes as it goes all the way down, and so the key to that kaibab is where those deer are going to be in their food. I want something I want to talk about. Last year, I told you that the deer were going to be in the oaks, and I was wrong. They weren't. I went down there, and I wasn't there 30 minutes, and for whatever reason, it was a very poor oak crop, and those deer went through that and went on down. There's a little bush that and I don't know the name of it, so I'm not going to act like I do, but in the high country, these deer, every time I seen these deer, and it doesn't grow but about 12, 14 inches off the ground, those deer were gorging themselves on it, and they were eating that thing like crazy. And so when I seen that, and I went to a couple canyons I know on top, and then that's where we killed those deer. They were in that air eating off that bush that it wouldn't quit.
Now,
So they didn't fall down to the next level.
are you talking about the early hunt when you were telling
Yes,
me
I
they were
am.
going to be? You told me they were going to be in the transition. So a
Yeah,
bunch of
I
deer
met a friend of
got through.
yours, Jay. I met a friend of yours at the gas station, and he said, "Mr. Adams," he says, "I'm a friend of Jay Scott's," and I said, "Yeah." He said, "You told Jay that they were going to be in the Oaks," and I said, "I did, and they're not." I said And I said, I did that on a podcast, and they're not. And I told him, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I said, listen, I said, there's a little green bush. And I said, it's got this kind of prickly stuff on it. I said, that's where those deer are. They're on top. And I said, just kind of look at the bush. It grows out in the open. It doesn't grow. And I said, if you hunt those canyons, and I told him a couple places to go. I said, that's where we're killing the deer. And people are driving by them, but those deer are eating that little bush.
Would you say most years the early hunt that, the majority of the deer are still up on top and, there's obviously some resident deer in the middle zone and down low, but most of the deer are on top, are they not?
That's exactly right. That's their. I Jay, I think that they stay up there, until they're pushed out of there, and they get pushed big time when that gun goes off. When those guys start shooting and chasing and all that, those big deer don't. They hate that, and they just start moving, and I think they move to where there's nobody bothering them, and if there's other people, they just keep moving, and that's what I found. Uh, about 8 or 9 years ago, Brett Kelly, a young man at Guys for me, killed a 225, and there's a little canyon that we hunt that it's midway round down, and he glassed across the canyon. The deer was laying there asleep with his head on the ground. He was wore out, and when he killed it, he come back to camp, got all of us. We went up there. When we gutted that thing, there was hardly nothing in its stomach, Jay. It had been walking and probably been chased from place to place to place, and that we'd come up with that, and it hadn't stopped and fed, is what I'm trying to say. And
Sure.
it was wore out from being pushed for 20 miles, and we killed it.
Looking at the 12A West late hunt, it looks like the tags, they used to be 100 and they've dropped last year the last 2 years at 70, or last year at 75, and this year they're at 75 as well. How do you think that's going to help the quality of bucks? And did that same storm where you guys had a ton of snow, did that also hinder the 12A West hunt? And do you think those holdover bucks?
Yeah, it hindered it horribly. Where we camped down there, my two of my guys' camps collapsed, and they spent the day trying to get out, and they moved to Kanab, and then they had to try to come into the Oak Corral, and they fought the snow so bad that they were bringing 5 gallons, 3 and 4, 5 gallons of gas, 15, 20 gallons just to get out of there because it was 4-wheel drive chained up. You know how that goes. They just eats gas like crazy. So they couldn't get to any of the places that they wanted to hunt. So it really had there's a tremendous amount of bucks that made it through that would have probably got shot.
So would you say you're more optimistic about the West Side going into this season than you have in a long time?
Yes, by far. Yeah, I had a gentleman, and we killed his deer on the second day, and it scored 190, and it was a, and Mark couldn't get around. He had some heart problems. He had several heart operations, and I told him, I said, Mark, that's a great deer. I said, there's a big storm coming. And I said, you want a 190 or better? I said, that's a 190 deer. He said, that's a great deer. And he shot it. He sent me a picture about 2 days ago. He's tickled to death. And then he almost didn't get his trailer out. He was tickled to death that he killed the deer and got out of there before it turned upside down.
Man. What about 12B? Do you spend much time in 12B?
Yeah, we hunt. I don't hunt 12B on the early hunt, but because those deer haven't really poured in there from Ponsagot, and they haven't poured in there from the Kaibab. There's still some good station bucks in the Vermilion Cliffs and on the back there, but there are no herds of them. You better know where they're at if you're going to go get them. But yeah, we've killed some great deer on the 12B on the late season.
12B, what would you say as far as if you were looking at upper end bucks, what's the best hunt? 12A East late, 12A West late, or 12B late?
I would stay with 12B. I'd stay with 12A East and 12A West because if they don't move, they're going to be at those two places. Right. And so I don't want to go on an Easter egg hunt. I'd rather have to still have the deer in my unit.
If you had to choose between 12A East and 12A West late, which is your favorite?
I'd take the West.
west. Do you think there's ever a point where that will change, or is it just because of the amount of country and the amount of deer that makes that late hunt just better on the west side?
I think that it's I've been there so long that I know holes that nobody knows about. That sometimes we will check them, you know, and there's no deer there, and then we'll go back and check them 2 or 3 years later. For example, I had a rancher that hunted with me about 4 years ago, and there was a little hole we went and checked, and we hadn't killed a deer there in 4 or 5 years, and there were 11 bucks in there, or 3 bucks and were over 200 inches, and there's nobody been there. There's nobody been there for years, and for whatever reason, they're in that hole, and we killed a great deer.
Duwane, how much does hunting those early hunts on the east side and the west side, how much, for a 40-year period, how much does hunting that a month before you come for the late hunt kind of set you up for success on the late hunt, as far as noticing things that the deer are doing or being able to predict where they're going to be because you're hunting them a month earlier on the early hunt?
Well, listen, Jade, what's good about that is the guys that work with me are good people, and we're going to different places. So, for example, somebody will run down to jump up, and we've got some holes down there, or slide, and they'll say they're not there. So that stops all the nonsense of running around in the hunt. But if you go down there halfway, 3/4 through the hunt, and you see sign there, then we know that one of those holes that we're hunting down there there's going to be a lot of does, and there's going to be a big buck move into it. So that saves you a lot. And also, that being said, if they've left the oaks like they did last year, and they've already moved through there's a lot of people that are hunting the oaks for 3 or 4 days thinking that there's going to be deer there, and they're already 20 miles past that. So it stops a lot of the nonsense. We're going right to where we know the deer are instead of where we think they're going to be.
Yeah, makes sense. Duwane, I know you give a ton of glassing lessons, and I'm sure with the COVID-19 it was probably a little less than normal this late winter and spring. But I get messages. I know we've talked on the podcast. I've probably gotten, I would say, 30 to 50 messages from guys and every single one of them says how much value spending a day with you, getting a glassing lesson and learning that angle of the dangle and all of those different things that you go over. Talk a little bit about your glassing lessons, and are you going to start those back up?
We started them 2 days ago. Gave the first young man, a really nice man, glassing lessons, and he came from your podcast, and he's a typical guy that has not had, well, just wants to go find some deer. He doesn't care if he kills a big deer. And in the course of that lesson, we glassed over 40 Coues deer. And in every situation, I explained to him what's going on, right? And why we're doing this. And why. He said, Mr. Adams, he said, you make it easy. I said, look, son, I said, in 40 years, if I don't make it easy, I better get my license off. He started laughing. I said, but this is going to be easy for you from now on. You're going to quit looking where the deer aren't and start looking where they are. And so the glassing lessons, I just like to give back, Jay. I think that, and I've told my son-in-law and my son, look, I've been blessed with the ability to find deer, and so why can't you help people so that they can find deer? And so you bet. We just started the glassing lessons back up, and if anybody's interested, give us a call, and we'd love to take you and spend the morning.
You normally do, singles or groups or, twos and
We
threes?
No, we do both. I get $300 for a person, but if they bring their buddy, we cut $50 off of each of them, so it's $250. And we take groups too, because you'll have guys that want to have 3 or 4 guys there, And the only thing they've got to have is a tripod and binoculars. You can't come to the class if you don't, because it's not helping you at all. But if they have that, then the rest is history. Then we're going to, I stop at about 7 or 8 or different places. It's just not from one place. I tell them to move. It's like bass fishing. I said, are we seeing every deer? Probably not, but we're seeing 90%. If you see 90% at each time, you're going to see a big deer.
I think that's one thing that's maybe gotten looked over and maybe a little bit forgotten is there's been so much emphasis on, sitting up high and glassing and really pounding it out. But there is something to, spending 45 minutes to an hour and moving 45 minutes to an hour in another spot, 45 minutes to an hour. And in the course of a morning from sun up to, say 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, you could have already hit 4 or 5 different spots. Do you feel like that's a strategy that you have used for 40 years to be successful?
Yes, you better believe it. That's exactly how I've been successful. And more times than not, that move we found the buck and was able to kill it. And I tell the guys on the lessons or the clients, if we just stayed back there, we wouldn't have found this deer. So yeah, that's exactly it. I think it's very important to move and to move a lot. And then that being said, now let's say we find a great big deer, then I don't move. That's the difference. If we find, 120 or 30 deer and I know where he's at, then the game changes, Jay. We stay and we get different angles. We just keep moving until he makes a mistake. But if you don't find that deer, you just can't keep glassing and seeing the same does.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, as on those earlier hunts, sometimes it's, you can sit a little bit more in one spot because they're only going to be moving for a short period of time, and you've got to catch them when they're moving. But certainly on some of these kaibab hunts, on these late hunts, and even some of these later Coues deer hunts, when they're up and moving on their feet more, it just makes sense if you pound it out for 45 minutes or an hour and then change your angle and change your look, you're still catching deer on their feet. So your level of productivity goes way up because the deer are on their feet. Whereas if they're not on their feet and you're moving around all the time, you're kind of missing that 10-minute window when they might be up.
That's right. That's exactly what I showed the young man a couple of days ago. And I said, don't look at that hillside no more. They're on that northwest cut, so those cuts right there. And really, what was really nice, he glassed a deer. He said, I see one, Mr. Adams. I said, you see one? He said, it's underneath that oak tree. And I said, you got it, son. He said, man, he got so excited. He said he was going to PM you and tell you. And I said, well, please do. But, I appreciate you. You've sent me hundreds of people to glass, and I thank God none of them has talked bad about me.
Well, it's always great getting to talk to you on the podcast. And again, I encourage any Unit 1 elk hunters, if they're looking for a guide, Duwane's got some room there for some archery elk hunts and those early firearm season elk hunts. Give Duwane a call. Also for deer, Duwane, we've got this deadline June 9th. Wish you the best of success on the draw. And it's always great talking to you. I want to give you a chance, and I'll also link it up in the show notes of how people can best reach you.
Yes, sir. Give me a call at Duwane Adams, and my phone number is 520-385-4995. And you don't have to hire me. Just call and give me, if you got some questions, because I understand it. I'd be more willing to try to help anybody you can. But if you'd like to hire us, we'd love to have you. And Jay, one other thing, we're hunting archery deer in the kaibab. We haven't talked about that, but we've been killing some great deer up there in the kaibab. So if anybody draws that archery kaibab tag, give us a call. And you can follow me on Duwane Adams Hunting on Instagram and my Facebook page. And I'd love to talk to all of you.
Yeah, and another thing you've been doing, Duwane, is you've been answering a lot of questions on social media. And so my hat's off to you for giving your time and answering those questions. I want to encourage people to check Duwane out on his social media, and you can go back and watch those question and answer sessions. So, Duwane, it's always great. Good luck in the draw, and let's hope for better times with everything going on.
God bless you, Jay, and God bless America.
All right,
Bye-bye.
all right, buddy. Take care.